Spire.
From Spire, this is Starting Now, a show about change, resilience, and your next big idea. I'm Jeff Sarris. Today I'm talking to Brian Gardner, the founder of StudioPress and the creator of the Genesis theme for WordPress. We dive into Brian's journey, how he started as a solo entrepreneur, what it was like to grow and build a large team, and then ultimately what it was like to sell his company. Let's get started. All right, so hey there, Brian. Thanks for being on the show. Thanks for being the very first guest on Starting Now.
Well, I am absolutely honored to be on the show. Thank you for inviting me, Jeff, and I look forward to talking about stuff.
Yeah, all the stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking, like, we've known each other almost a decade now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Like,
I was, in fact, on my Instagram feed the other day, just scrolling years back, and I'm sure you remember we used to meet up, a bunch of us just there at Streets of Woodfield, and I was like, man, that was so long ago. We look like such babies.
Yeah, yeah, time really flies, and like so much has changed, and like we talked about today, we're talking all about change and sort of what you've experienced through your journey of starting out as an entrepreneur, going all the way through building a large company, and eventually the sale to the acquisition of your company.
Mm-hmm.
So for anyone who doesn't know, why don't you just sort of give us a little background of who you are, sort of the overview?
Well, I am Brian Gardner. I'm the founder of StudioPress. Prior to that, I was a project manager at an architectural firm. I am currently unemployable, and there are a lot of ups and downs, lefts and rights along the way.
Yeah, I love that unemployable tag. It's just, it's perfect. It really encapsulates like what we do.
Yep.
And so you were the founder of StudioPress. You're the creator of Genesis and the Genesis theme for WordPress. And that was like, if I remember correctly, that you were sort of the first person to have a premium WordPress theme, right?
Yeah, that actually predates Genesis. That was the original theme was called Revolution back in the day when WordPress was notorious for just being a blogging platform. All the themes were free. I had done a custom design for somebody, a real estate agent in Boston. He didn't want anything as comprehensive as it was. He just wanted a straight blog theme, and I took it a few steps further. And so I went to my audience and I said, "Hey, this was a rejected design. Would anybody buy a premium WordPress theme?" Which arguably coined the term. And when I got hundreds of comments, and then I followed up with, "How much would you pay for a premium WordPress theme?" And hundreds of people told me how much they would pay. And at that point, it didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that there was possibly an opportunity here to make some money.
Yeah, very cool. And so you were working a job while you were building this side hustle. So was the it sounds like the initial thing was doing design and custom work for clients?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was freelancing, but I taught myself WordPress, how to CSS and style stuff. And I had built a small following around WordPress while I was on the clock at my day job, and had some free time. And so I dabbled around in WordPress, taught myself some things. And then, I had no intention ever on leaving that job or for anything to get as big as it did. It was really just, making some side cash to, go on vacations and things like that. But when Revolution hit and took off, and by month 3, I was generating $80,000 a month in sales, I thought to myself,
wow,
this is something that warrants my attention. So I quit my job. Shelly quit hers shortly thereafter, and the rest is history.
Yeah, that is an amazing trajectory. I mean, 3 months in also, granted, like how much groundwork would you say was laid? How much time were you investing in building your community and like sort of building up your skills before that point?
Not as much as one would think based on the numbers. A lot of that had to do with just being to the market first, and what I ultimately called the accidental entrepreneur. Kind of lucked into that one, which along the way, I know we'll cover some of the journey, but towards the middle and end of the journey, there was a little bit of anxiety around that. Like, was I lucky? Am I good? Things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I think those tie together too. I mean, luck, like we make our own luck. I mean, really, if you weren't capable, if you didn't know what you were doing with that, I mean, honestly, that luck wouldn't necessarily have been the same. I mean, but timing always does help. So who was who was Brian at this point then? So you say accidental entrepreneur. You weren't really like, were you thinking that maybe one day you would break out on your own? Were you purely just like purely a side hustle for extra cash, or was there ever that little nagging thought in your mind? And have you done anything before that? Any
Uh,
entrepreneurial endeavors?
no, just running a little baseball card trading company like every
Oh,
other
nice.
12-year-old kid back in the day. No, I had no business background or anything like that. Failed out of college, didn't get a degree. The job that I was at was given to me by a customer at a convenience store. You're local, so you remember White Hen Pantry. I
Uh-huh.
was a manager of that store. He offered me a job. I took it because it was way better than the hours I was working. And in that job, I taught myself a lot about just computers and IT and things like that, which is kind of when I got my feet wet with just technology. I mean, this is probably back in the mid '90s when this was all going down,
Hmm.
when I first got the job, and so I was happy there. It was a good job. I got health insurance, a couple weeks vacation. But then when the theme sales thing started taking off, I kind of at that point was getting restless. I had been there about 10 or 12 years. And this was right when Paneras were opening up and like people were doing quote internet things at the, coffee shops and stuff like that. So there was always a part of me that was kind of like, oh, this would be kind of cool to do this thing. This is what people do, whatever this is. And, I got into WordPress and started doing the theme sales. And when the revenue started really coming in, I was like, okay, this is way more than just a few bucks for vacation. And I remember telling Shelly, we had a conversation around it. She wanted to be the one that left first, and I was like, look, it's financially irresponsible right now for me to keep the job that I'm at. I feel like this is now the next season of my life, as a business person. And for my job. So I kind of took the jump. We have a mutual friend, Chris Cree. I remember exactly where I was sitting when I was talking to him, kind of anxious about taking the leap of faith. And he's like, man, I jumped ship 6 years ago and I haven't looked back. So I remember having that conversation and just being like, well, here we go. It's time.
Yeah, time to take the leap and get
Yep.
started. So what year was that then?
I left, I think it was 2006, maybe
Mhm.
2007. I always get those confused. So it was mid 2000s at that point when I left, and I was running Revolution. Theme sales were great, and then I got a cease and desist letter. So contacted my intellectual property attorney lawyer friend, and he said, they probably have grounds to come after you. I had no idea what I was doing. I was dumb as rocks when it came to business. I was just kind of doing what felt right, and like I had no idea what trademark and any of that stuff was. It's like I just wanted to name something cool. And so I had to rebrand Revolution, which I thought was, the end of my life. Like, oh my God, no one's gonna, whatever. But what I learned is when you build a following, an audience of people, rat people, as Paul Jarvis calls them, they follow you no matter what. And so I rebranded as StudioPress, pretty much without a hitch. Everybody came along, and as we all know, StudioPress is still a thing. And 2 years ago, it became no longer my thing.
Yeah, we're gonna jump ahead to that in a few minutes because that is quite a transition for you.
Yeah.
I mean, audience, it's huge. I mean, like we've talked about, it's why I'm starting this podcast too. We've been sort of hidden behind the scenes for many years, so it's high time to start connecting once again and trying to help the community that we're already selling products to, but really building a connection with them. So that's why we're here and talking to wonderful people like you. So now, from going from Revolution, then you rebranded as StudioPress.
Mm-hmm.
How did you then how did you connect with Brian Clark and Copyblogger?
So at the time, and there's some business lessons here in what I'm about to say. When things were going well, there was another guy in the community, the WordPress community, by the name of Chris Pearson. He had done a few free themes. I kind of looked up to him like a big brother kind of thing. Like I was, oh, I want to be like Chris, right? And so in order to try to be friendly with him, I started divulging information about how much money I was making with WordPress themes. And so Chris, as a smart, savvy entrepreneur, took that information and turned around and built a competitor. So careful what you say and who you say it to, I guess is the point there. So he had built a theme called Thesis, which was as StudioPress and Revolution kind of evolved into Genesis, they were sort of like the 1-2 in the market. And Chris was also smart enough to come alongside Brian Clark, partner with him, who at the time had founded Copyblogger. And so there was a big audience there, way bigger than I had. And so they really kind of left me in the dust. And Chris and Brian had differences of opinion in many things. And at some point when Genesis really became a thing and started gaining some traction, I think it caught the attention of Brian. And he realized at the time he no longer wanted to be partners with Chris. And he called me up one day and said, "Hey, what do you think about, teaming up? And, I'm thinking about leaving Chris and we're going to form a bigger company." And, at the time I was like, hey, like the money was great, but I was a little bit afraid that competition was going to put me back. And so I thought to myself, I have a better chance of succeeding big picture and ultimately with revenue and how much I make by teaming up with Brian. And so we formed Copyblogger Media, the whole company that it, encompassed the blog, all the software products, and the hosting.
Yeah, which eventually became quite large.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yep.
When the employees got up to tens, like
I
tens
think
of employees.
50 to 60 was, I think, at one point we had one of our company meetings and we were all in like this big room and I was like, oh my God. I mean, there's a lot of weight. It's great when companies grow and things like that, but there's a lot of weight and responsibility on our shoulders as partners. As I know Brian felt it as CEO of Copyblogger, and we kind of, crash under our own weight. Ultimately was what happened. And so.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big challenge. I mean, every employee that's added, you just think you have to then support their income, their salary. And that, just people ask us a lot about like if we would hire, and that's something that Dave and I, we want to stay super, super lean, because it's every dollar we make, we split between the two of us. If we had a third person, we suddenly have to worry about paying them constantly. And that changes things quite a bit. And speaking of employees, so when did you hire anyone when you were doing StudioPress on your own, or did you only work with people starting at StudioPress, starting at Copyblogger forward?
Yeah, I think there were 3 real employees, like payroll had to get all their information, that kind of thing. Craig Tuller, who was kind of CMO, COO at the time. Rebecca Diamond was running support, and Nathan Rice was programming and building Genesis and stuff like that, developing for pretty much everything. And then outside of that, the rest of it was sort of contractor based. And then of course, when we formed the company, right when we transitioned over, some of the people who I was paying as a contractor became employees of the company, like Rafal and Daisy Olson. And so, so I think I had 3, which wasn't terrible of a responsibility, just because there was enough money to not have that be a problem. But still, you, as a person who just never intended on being an entrepreneur, a small business owner, any of that stuff, I was learning every single day of what it meant to do any of that stuff.
Absolutely. And those are huge changes. I mean, going from working for a company to having your own company to having people that you're then responsible for. That's a lot. What would you say in terms of that transition there? I mean, that was a big time of change from leaving your job through Copyblogger, through getting to Copyblogger. How would you say life changed? So going from a day job to your own thing, to employees.
The easiest way to explain it was when I was working for somebody else, it was their responsibility. When I was doing it myself, it was my responsibility. And then when we moved into Copyblogger, it became our responsibility. So I went from like 0 to 100 to then, there was 5 of us partners, so theoretically 20%. But one of the other reasons why, aside just from a revenue and sort of competition standpoint, I chose to, form Copyblogger with Brian and everybody else was, there were things that I just wanted to offload responsibility wise. I didn't want to be doing taxes. I didn't want to be doing some of the other things. And I was like, hey, if I do this move, I can just go do what I want to do, which was ultimately product and design. I was chief product officer. I didn't have to worry about doing taxes or accounting or handling support or doing all of the things that are necessary, but just not what I wanted to be doing.
What would you say then was the sweet spot sort of for because Copyblogger became very large. I mean, you had all the different products where StudioPress was one of the companies under the umbrella. For StudioPress, did you find a sweet spot for employees? Like how many people that really felt manageable from your perspective and to balance everything?
Yeah, I would say like the first 5 years of it all, before we really introduced hosting and things of that nature, was really just StudioPress and Copyblogger, and then we had a small plugin called Premise and Scribe. But for the most part, it was like those first 5 years. We had a smallish team, you know, 6, 7, 8 of us. Kind of, the thing about our company was we had a lot of people who sort of played a role in different lines of the same role across many lines of business. So it wasn't like we had a StudioPress this person and then a Copyblogger that person. We had Daisy who handled support for both, and so it's hard to quantify. Hey, we've had only 5 employees with StudioPress. There were 5 or 6 or 7 people whose part-time role it was to participate their duties within StudioPress, but it never really needed anything really, really big. It just, we developed themes, we sold them, we supported them. Unlike with hosting and some other things that came on later, especially Rainmaker, which became a really sort of resource intensive endeavor, and we learned a ton through the couple of years that Rainmaker was a thing.
Yeah, that was a big product. I mean, I remember the launch, like going to the event, like and seeing you guys out in, I think that was Denver.
Denver, yeah.
And yeah, you had your you had several authority conferences with thousands of people that would show up, and you launched Rainmaker there, which was the all-encompassing platform, sort of a repackaging of WordPress that then became this premium hosting, premium platform. That seemed like an inflection point for the company when things really changed. So looking back, what would you say are the biggest takeaways from doing that, from really, I mean, jumping leaps and bounds really into this hosting world?
Yeah, first of all, the hosting space is very competitive, very low margin, a lot of different types of things. It's not what it was now, which is where hosting companies like WP Engine, we'll get to this in a minute, becomes like all encompassing platforms themselves. We were a small company trying to do way too many things. Rainmaker, in theory, was a brilliant idea, could have been executed well if it was our only thing, and of course higher margins. But we were like, StudioPress was a really big brand, Copyblogger was a really big brand, and so when Rainmaker came up, it not only sort of cannibalized a lot of our efforts, it took a lot of our resources kind of away from some of the other things, and was supposed to be the thing that carried us into the future, but it had a huge anchor, and we felt it. And we did a lot of great things with Rainmaker. The idea of Rainmaker, the podcast network that we launched, there was a lot of good things that came out of it, but it was just, I think we bit off a little more than we could chew.
Yeah, that is the challenge. It's something that I'm dealing with right now with quarantine. I mean, there's a little more opportunity of time for me, and trying to start this podcast, which I wanted to start so long ago, starting to produce content and doing all these things. I'm sort of hitting my point and realizing like how much can I actually take on? And I mean, that was an interesting time, really, like from my perspective, to really watch and see how everything has changed. Because Rainmaker was, I mean, it's a great product. It was a great product, and it was a great idea, but I think it came from that idealism that we share, like you and I, and like I know, like Brian Clark, and it's just sort of entrepreneurial idealism where it's like, well, no, we're going to take this and make it amazing. I mean, this is going to do well. We're going to make it amazing. And then sometimes we have to dial it back and realize, oh, we took this from this point to that, but now we have to support this. We have to continue development. We've added many more moving parts that maybe we didn't anticipate we're going to move quite so much throughout the journey. I know for us, that's one of the big things, being just the two of us trying to keep moving parts to a minimum, but that's not the easiest task to figure out, to solve, the easiest problem to solve. But yeah, so then I think I'm going to jump forward just right onto the sale, because I mean, you built this big company year over year. I mean, things were pretty strong, pretty stable, but I mean, it is, again, just a lot to manage. What was the impetus for the sale, for reaching out and seeing if someone want to acquire StudioPress?
So I would say probably about 3 years from when we sold StudioPress, we, like Rainmaker was becoming a thing. We started to feel the weight of everything. Um, Sales in general, revenue through all of the channels that we had. Just, I think at that point, the internet marketing and WordPress theme sort of worlds had been maturing, more competition, lower price, like things just started to sort of change and transition. So for us, revenue started dipping, and so we had to do a few layoffs, which was absolutely brutal. Some of my closest friends, people that have been around from almost the beginning of it all, we had to lay off, and that was heartbreaking. And so that was sort of the first iteration of, okay, this, it's not just going to be like, this forever. It's not going to be happy go lucky. We're all making money and things are great forever. And there's a reality involved that, there are waves that happen in the internet and the longevity of a business where things aren't, like it starts to slow down and things like that. And so one of the things we had decided to do was we had just too many lines of business within the company. We had Copyblogger, we had Rainmaker, we had Synthesis Hosting, we had StudioPress, the podcast network, we had launched digital commerce. There were so many things that we were kind of doing. And when we were trying to figure out if we wanted to either sell the company or bring in investments, we had gone multiple rounds with multiple folks who had ultimately in the end said, you know what, we're just not interested in the whole thing. Like, X company wanted just this section of the company, but they were all sort of married up with one another. So we had decided to make the transition, at least as the first step, from taking Synthesis, the hosting, and kind of rolling that into the StudioPress brand. And we called that StudioPress Sites. And we were like, well, if we could just kind of dial things back a bit and sort of segment the lines of business, they'd be easier to hand off at that point. And so we had started to do that. We had launched StudioPress Sites. Things were going fairly well. And then Brian Clark and I went to WordCamp US down in Nashville in 2017, I think is when it was. And we had been kind of talking about what we should do with StudioPress and all of that. And he had made a comment when we were at dinner one night that led me to believe he didn't think I wanted to sell it. And so I looked over across the table at him at the steakhouse there in downtown Nashville. And I said, Brian, I don't think you know this, but I'm ready to sell StudioPress. And he was trying to be considerate, right? I was the founder of StudioPress. He, the founder of Copyblogger. So he understood sort of, getting rid of your baby and things of that nature. And so he just wanted, he didn't want to push that on me. But when I told him I was ready, that next morning we woke up and we hit the circuit there at WordCamp US and started talking to, our internal sort of network of people that we knew in high places, predominantly in the hosting space. And we reached out to about 5 people, had multiple conversations, and WP Engine was one of them. Strangely, they were not at the top of my list. In fact, they were towards the bottom of my list, just because I was naive and didn't know that much about them. I'd sort of prejudged them from the outside. But as we started to, hear back from them, we realized they were taking this conversation very seriously. They valued it very fairly. And we realized that this was a partner we wanted to move forward with.
Yeah. And then you went on to, so you've had several big, just major changes throughout this journey. I mean, you went to a solo entrepreneur, employees, big company. Now suddenly you sold your company.
Yep.
And you were on as, was it a consultant?
Yeah, it was a contract-based thing. I told him I was unemployable. I said, part of the whole deal when we were talking is, one of the stipulations is, I had 2 stipulations. One, that our team comes over and stays with them. Like, in other words, we're not selling it and then everybody gets fired. So I said, our people are important to me. And so you're taking the product, the community, but you also need to take the people. The other one was, I'm not hireable. I don't want to work, not because it's WP Engine. I just didn't want to work for anybody. So I said, I want to start to kind of figure out what I want to do again in my next life. And I'm more than happy to stay on sort of in a transitional period to help sort of alleviate the anxieties of the community, because a lot of people were running businesses that were based on Genesis. And so we knew that that was something we had to handle very carefully. And so I had set up for an 18-month contract to kind of help with the transition and just still be a part of the project. And so that was yet another role I played, which was contractor, to a big company.
Yeah. And emotionally, how did that affect you? Because this was, I mean, what, 10, 12 years, this was like your baby, the thing that you'd built like your life around. How did that feel?
It was strangely almost anticlimactic at the time. We had the last, year and a half of before we sold, the company itself had sort of what I jokingly think to myself has infiltrated the StudioPress brand, where we had copy blogger people coming over and doing podcasts and doing things, marketing on the StudioPress side, to where it was already like, okay, now I'm kind of separating myself, emotionally from this, because I don't get to run this anymore. Right. I'm a steward of the brand. But we had, Jared came over and he had started a podcast, I think, along with Sean and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, it was easy to start to kind of detach myself a little bit. So by the time we sold it, um, it was time. 10, 12 years owning something, yes, is endearing, but it's also very tiring. And so I was ready at that point to move on, to other things. And I knew I felt comfortable putting it in the hands of WP Engine. So,
Yeah, that daily grind
mhm.
nonstop. I mean, because you were on social, you were doing everything building that brand for so many years. Like,
Yep.
you're arguably still the face of that brand, even though you're not associated with it anymore.
Yeah.
Just I think you always will be. If you were to go back to sort of pre Studio Press Brian, what might you tell him? So sort of like hindsight being what it is there anything that you would maybe not do differently, but that
Mhm.
you would inform him about, just to understand that this is coming, understand that like what you're going to have to consider moving forward?
There would probably be a lot of, like, checking of pride is one thing. Like, you're going to find many opportunities to be prideful about many things, and to be humbled and all of that. And I've really tried to stay as humble as I can through all this. I don't feel at all I'm seen from the outside as this arrogant type of person. Um, but I think one of the biggest lessons is sort of understanding the role I play within each of the things that I do, and to understand that no matter what I'm doing, I'm still a person and I'm still an individual. And I lost myself kind of willingly. Um, I say sometimes to some of my closer friends that I felt like I started to develop codependency tendencies, within business, where I was afraid to do my own thing. And, there's going to be a lot of opportunity. It was easy to kind of coast along, from just from a positivity standpoint, when things are going well, and you didn't have to do all day everyday work anymore, because the brand was kind of carrying itself. And I got lazy. To be quite honest, it was easy to say, okay, I can just kind of kick my feet up and just like coast along with the company and do these things. And then kind of we hit some rough waters, and I was like, yeah, it's fine. We got 5 partners, and revenue still coming in. And then we sold it, and then I was part of the transition for a while. And then when I, this past December, when that contract ended, it was eerily quiet. And I was like, this is what I wanted, but it's also very lonely. And so,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, entrepreneur life can be very lonely at times. I mean,
Hmm.
we're sitting in our homes doing everything. We don't technically need to see any humans with the kind of stuff that we do.
Hmm.
Like, we could very, very easily go months at a time doing everything over the internet.
Yep.
Not even doing video chats, not even doing that. It's definitely not something that our biology is like geared for.
Right.
It's very different. But so speaking of that transition now, I mean, you have your name, you have your platform, but you're essentially you're starting something
Hmm.
completely new now, a new journey, a new chapter in your life. A lot of people right now are dealing with major change with COVID-19, the pandemic, the inevitable pivot that they're going to have to make in their lives, maybe because of jobs changing, jobs being downsized. Um, how are you approaching this time now that you're in this as well?
I look at it kind of as a challenge. Like, I realize that the COVID-19 thing has sort of introduced this whole new spectrum of like all kinds of people that are going to be in our space. But that also sort of inflects at the same point where I feel like, I've been around the internet for 15 years now, right? And as a Gen Xer, I'm starting to feel like sort of the creep of the generations behind us, the ones with more time, more ambition, better ideas, things of that nature. There's a whole slew of these designers and creators where, 10 years ago, it was a handful of us doing our thing back
Mm-hmm.
in the day. Competition was small. Everybody else was working a day job. But now it's like you kind of look over your shoulder and you're like, not only, I mean, I'm prepared to handle what lies ahead. I've got the experience to handle what lies ahead. But my biggest concern was after the sale of StudioPress, would I still be relevant? Would my name still matter to people in the WordPress space or the entrepreneurial space? And will I be seen? Like, did I coast too long towards the end where people kind of forgot about me and realized, like, who is this guy? Like, a lot of people, WordPress has grown so much. So many people in WordPress have no idea who I am. Yet in my head, I tell myself the story. Everyone knows who I am. I started the premium WordPress theme space, and people are like, what does that even mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I look forward to sort of just entering. I'm 45 now, and I think Brian Clark's kind of in that same period I am, which is like, what does the next life for us mean? The next season of our life. We're not going to just go back and do the same thing we did 15 years ago or 10 years ago. It just doesn't work anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to sort of keep up with these young ones, who are on TikTok and, growing YouTube channels and doing all of these things that I don't even know what they are sometimes. Like, I got to go look that up because I don't want to be that guy who doesn't know that thing.
Uh-huh.
So, but, again, I have a passion for what I do. I love to design. I love entrepreneurial journeys. I love, helping and teaching and growing communities. I feel like, email is the cornerstone of any smart business. And so I feel like there's things that are in place there. I've got a huge network of people to work with. And so that will help throttle, me into my next venture.
Yeah, and I think that's comforting too for people. Like people just starting out too. It's like the relevancy is a big question, I think, just that's sort of all on our minds. Like how do we stay relevant? How do we sort of stay in the public space enough where our business can benefit? I mean, because it is we buy from people who we know, like, and trust, and if we don't have those three things going for us, how do we actually keep going? I think it's rather comforting probably for people to know that even someone like you you've been doing this, I mean, for many years now, and you've built quite an audience and done all these things, but you still, of course, question that as well. Like who knows? And I like that you said the generation sort of coming up behind us, because it is so interesting. Like, I don't know, we started Spire when I was in like my late 20s. Like you started like late 20s, early 30s. There's a different drive and energy at that time. I don't know, at least for me. I'm assuming you might have a similar feeling, but like at that time I was just go. Like Dave and I were taking all these, like, before people had their faces on everything, we're going out taking like environmental photos and really crafting a brand of us. Like I remember when we started, it was that's actually, well, to rewind a bunch, we were working with Men with Pens, and we weren't like breaking out and starting our own thing, but Dave and I had already done side work separate from that company. And I remember I went to New York, saw Dave for a weekend. We launched our site. It was web design. We don't do it, we live it. And we had all these photos like throughout New York City, like standing under the not the L, but whatever they call it, subway, and standing under the train, like photos here, photos there. But at that time, people weren't really doing that. It was a different thing. So it resonated. And then it was funny. I remember you saw it and I was just like, oh yeah, like don't bring it up. We're not trying to promote it or anything. But then you're like, I kind of have to. And then that was our little nudge into Dave and I being 100% solo, like, well, a duo, but solo on our own. And which worked out well. Like, I mean, that was the trajectory we were on. It just happened a little sooner than we anticipated. But it's such a different time then. Like, sort of personally for me, I was a different me creating this brand. And now trying to get back and be public, I'm not necessarily, I have the drive, like all the drive and entrepreneurial stuff is there, but I think it's that naivete that is missing. So it's a different, like everything has much more strategy and much more planning, because I understand the trajectory. Like we've built our stuff, we've worked with rather big brands over the years, and we've built things, so we sort of know what's in store, where maybe we're not throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks as much anymore, which could be good to a degree. We're not wasting time, but at the same time, we're missing those gems, the things that we might not have otherwise, that we might not do now, that we might have tried before, and like, oh, people actually like this. This is something that connects in a way to get out there. But yeah, I totally relate to that. Like the generations coming up behind, it's interesting. And like for this community, that's, I mean, starting now, the whole concept behind this podcast is really, um, it's as much for me as the community. It's like, no, I just want to get started. I need to do this. I've been planning this forever. I'm just going to start now and see what happens. We're starting to talk to people. I say I, but I'm talking to people like you who are awesome and have done like amazing things and really trying to see. So what can we learn? I mean, for me, for Spire, but also for our community, people just starting out. For someone that you would say is just starting out and maybe a Gen Xer like you, what
Yeah.
would you do? You have any sort of advice on how they could start building a community? Because I mean, community is that's the lifeline.
Yeah, I'm going to heed my own advice here. I know this advice because I've done it, but again, having been sort of lazy and back at the beginning of this process again, I look and it seems like the uphill angle is a little bit steeper now, right? Because of all the kids
Mhm.
that are behind us and whatnot, But and I've been asked this sort of question over what advice do you give people who are new and all that kind of stuff. Um, as a runner, I use the illustration of the marathon and the wall when you hit the wall, because no doubt in any, whether it's running, whether it's starting a business, whether it's going to school or doing whatever, there's always a point or many points. Usually it's like a season where you're like very clearly like, I'm done. I want to throw in the towel. This isn't working. I don't have what it takes. Things of that nature, to break through it. I am a short to mid distance runner. I half marathons are my sweet spot, 13.1 miles. And so for years I had heard my wife Shelly, you know her, she's run 6 marathons, and so been around running enough to know that there is a thing called the real runner's wall, right? Not just the sort of the what we call the entrepreneurial wall. And so a few years ago I decided to finally do a longer race. It was a 20-mile race, and I was at mile 17. And for the first time, I was literally like in the eye of the hurricane, right? I felt literally like, oh my God, this is actually the wall. I've heard about the wall. I've done it through business, but I'm literally running right now. And all I want to do is stop and cry and curl up. Um, and you don't, you get through it. You're like, okay, I know this is what it is, but I know that there's a finish line. I know it's not far and things of that nature. And so you take that over to the business side of things, and you have days or weeks or sometimes even months where you're like, this is it. I'm done. This isn't working. I'm going to go back and work for somebody else. I'm going to do something else. And my biggest piece of advice is to always at least give it the college try, at least try to stick with it and to not give up.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is that consistency, that longevity where really we push through. I mean, we get longevity from every day. There's a quote that I keep at the top of my to-do list, and I'm gonna butcher it a little bit, but it's from Paul Graham. It was just a tweet, but he's like a technologist, I think the founder of Y Combinator. But
Mm-hmm.
it's just the doing more will find your life's purpose, just like water finds the hole in your roof. And it's right along those lines. And I really feel like it's that doing, it's that figuring out, and maybe like purpose couldn't be too grandiose of a concept here, but really the more we do, the more we figure out sort of what path is it that we want to pursue. Because I think a lot of us are living lives that we've been at some point been told this is what we're supposed to do, and
Yep.
maybe stuck in a job or staying somewhere because of like the schooling that we paid for. But maybe there is this other thing that we want to slowly build up on the side, a little side hustle, not quitting a job and starting from zero, but
Mm-hmm.
like you did. I mean, you built a serious business, like revenues that are probably mind blowing for anyone listening to this, and it's amazing then because you're the perfect example of like building that net, building the foundation before you jump. I mean, which is I think extremely important. I think a lot of times people want the shortcuts, I mean,
Yeah.
you invested the time, you invested in the community, in the product, in all of it. And then you're like, okay, this is the time now I can move forward. I can really pursue this and go all in. But yeah, I think that's really commendable and really, really valuable.
So I will follow that up with all of those things you said are true. I will follow up the second piece of advice, which I will give. I mean, ask anybody in professional sports or in Hollywood or a WordPress guy. Don't assume it will last. That's the other thing, right? Don't get too comfortable. Don't assume just because it is today this $80,000 a month thing that's just how the next, X amount of months are going to go. Because you get too comfortable, things happen, people come into the picture, like things change quickly, especially in our day and age with the internet stuff. People, coronavirus comes and just wipes off companies like
Oh
in
yeah.
a day. And so always sort of be prepared and just understand that, you always have to sort of have not contingency plans, but just making sure that your house is built on a solid foundation and things of that nature, and to like really tap into the skill sets that brought you there and to keep them current, right? Because technology changes and all of that stuff. And so that's sort of where I'm at now, where I'm like, okay, like what do I know and how will that work applied to with what's going on now, and communities, and the ecosystem looks differently and stuff like that. So always be on your toes.
Yeah, I mean that's the perfect encapsulation of this podcast too. I mean
Yeah.
resiliency. That's at the core of what I'm hoping to help people like determine, like how to craft a more resilient life, be able to deal with change. I mean, we're in one of what's probably set to be the most dramatic change that any of us will experience in our lifetimes. I mean, right now it's big. I mean, so much has already changed, but
Yep.
so to jump forward just a little then to what you're doing right now. I know it's coming soon, but you had mentioned a little thing about email earlier.
I did that on purpose. It was a breadcrumb for our encounter. Yes, there are a few things in life that are almost certain. Properties, taxes, and death, and all of those things, of course, are kind of the jokes of what will always be. But one thing I think that will always be, or at least a very significant part of anybody's way of life, whether it be personally or from a business perspective, is email. It is the direct path from one person to another. As Paul Jarvis calls it, it's a personality. It's a personal thing. Like you can talk to one person via email. Social media is great and can be used very well for many things. But email, there's stats all over the place. It converts however many times better than social media, but it's a communication. It's like our front door to our world and the world in which the people we talk to. And so I loved doing what I did with StudioPress and WordPress. As we all know, WordPress is sort of transitioning itself into a different type of way to build websites, and just tiring sometimes. This, you built Genesis themes. I mean, just to accommodate all of the sort of nuances that come with software and all of the plugins that are like, it just, zillions of people using it, they're going to use it in different ways. And so, in the matter of simplicity, I am working on a little project that is at its core very, very simple, almost stupid simple. But it's also very important. It helps people use email in their business to grow their business. Helps them tell their story, helps them build an audience and things like that. So a little bit cryptic, but it won't be too long. But yeah. So
Yeah, probably shortly after this podcast launches, this episode comes out,
yeah.
well, you're probably going to make an announcement. So where would you say people should follow along to learn more about you and maybe then learn about the next thing?
So everything that's coming out of me right now is literally coming from my personal accounts. My website is briangardner.com. I am pretty much B Gardner and all the socials, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, things of that nature. And so I share a lot in social media, Instagram stories, I'll just, designs and what's going on in my life, mainly from the business side of things, but just things I'm working on. So the main socials is where people can follow along. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, and they can probably hop on your email list, like at briangardner.com, to know exactly when the new thing launches.
Correct.
And yeah, I mean, that is like you said, email is so valuable. That's exactly why I started finally emailing our list. We've built a list for a decade.
Yep.
And I think I looked, and the last time I had emailed was August of 2013. So I went from August 2013 to what was it, March 2020, which is not how you should do email. If I would have been keeping up with everyone for all those years, there would be such a connection with the community that I'm starting now. This is where we go. This is where we're going.
Yeah. They say, but there's the two best days to plant a tree are 20 years ago and today. right? So
Mm-hmm.
don't use the
Absolutely.
fact that you didn't plant it 20 years ago to not plant one today. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm really excited for the email project, and
yep,
yeah, I'm sure people listening too will be as well. But
good.
anyway, yeah, I'm not going to take more of your time. Thank you so much for doing this,
Hmm.
and
My pleasure.
yeah, we'll talk soon.
Sounds good.
See ya.
Take care.
A big thanks goes out to Brian Gardner for joining me today. Be sure to follow Brian on all the socials at bgardner and on his website, briangardner.com. This episode is brought to you by Built, your website built for you simply. Built is our platform for building WordPress websites. We offer minimalist WordPress themes, Built VIP hosting. We help you and get started and rolling on your next project. So go to built.co, that's bylt.co to learn more. That is built.co. And you can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. As always, this is Starting Now. I'm Jeff Sarris, and I hope that this inspired you to get started on your own project. See ya.